Howdy everyone, Kazi and Judd here. We've been going through our prep for the new tier and wanted to give our take on a 10.1 tank tier list. So going into the new season, we've got quite a bit of change. We have a whole new dungeon pool, we have new tier sets, and we have some reworks to the affixes. So we have quite a bit to jump into. And we'll start off with kind of the king at the end of season 1 and possibly the start of season 2.
Yeah, it's looking like prop Paladin once again is going to be the best tank, at least at the beginning of the season going in, for a few different reasons. Number one, it's just solid damage, both single target and AoE. Solid defensives, both against magic damage and physical damage. And then it also just brings a lot of utility that you're going to want this season, including a dispel from the tank spot with there being quite a few poison and disease effects in some of these dungeons. It's going to be really useful having like an extra dispel, especially with one of the new affixes in Corporal, which you need, or at least it's helpful to have an extra dispel so your healer doesn't have to heal up the health on the little ghosts and whatnot. So getting that extra utility out of your tank spot, as well as just Paladin being one of the best with interrupts, and what could potentially be a very ranged heavy. At least there's some predictions that the meta might be very ranged heavy this season. And so getting those extra kicks out of the tank roll is going to be extremely helpful. As far as their tier set goes, it actually looks like it's one of the more powerful ones, despite being, I would say, pretty underwhelming and not anything that needs to be played around. Basically, your Avenger Shield just does a little bit of extra damage. That damage is even converted into some self-healing. And then the 4-piece, essentially, like, just based off your critical strikes on your judgment. So you're not really building crit. So your judgment's not critting that much, and just using it on a dummy, I mean, you're basically getting like one extra proc maybe of Avenging Crusader with that 4-piece bonus, and just a little bit of extra damage from your judgment crits, actually triggering that Heartfire. So despite the tier set not really being very powerful, although their season 1 tier set really wasn't that powerful, just as a class and everything that the spec brings to the table, and the utility that it provides for the group, Prop Paladin again is looking like the best tank going into the season.
Yep. And then kind of in the tier down below that, Prot Warriors came into the start of Season 1 as kind of the clear favorite, kind of like where Protection Paladin is now, but they took a series of nerfs that kind of left them near the top, but not well as a standout tank well beyond anybody else. Their new set bonus is relatively strong. It adds damage to their shield slam and some extra damage based around using their last stand. It's not as strong as the Protection Paladin or the Vengeance Demon Hunter as far as pure numbers on the damage goes, but it's still respectably strong. One thing is that I'm not a huge fan of with the 2-piece right now is that it's going to probably make you end up running Bolster. With running Bolster, that's going to come at the expense of Spell Block in most situations. Spell Block throughout a lot of Season 1 carried Warrior through a lot of the heavy-hitting magical damage that was coming out, and it becomes very difficult to justify bringing it when you look at the build. If you do need Spell Block, you're going to end up dropping something like Enduring Defenses, which may leave you with not having 100% uptime on Shield Block, or else you drop maybe Impenetrable Wall, and there you end up having reduced Rage Generation and not as much Shield Wall uptime. I'm also not personally a huge fan of sets where it turns a defensive cooldown like Last Stand into something that you're pressing on cooldown for DPS. It kind of takes a little bit of that reason for having Last Stand, which is pretty much purely defensive, and kind of adds a little bit or kind of takes away some of the nuance of how you would use that. Warrior still is incredibly strong at taking physical damage and blocking that. They don't bring any dispels though, and or any really strong additional utility for the group. So they're going to end up being just a little bit down below Paladin, but they're still looking pretty strong. We're going to have them landing in the A tier for us.
All right, and the next tank landing in the A tier is going to be the Brewmaster Monk. I will say that the tier set is not very impactful and really not something that you're probably going to play around. The 4 set lends itself to giving you just a little bit of more AoE damage. Every time you dodge, you actually get increases the critical strike chance of your spinning crate kick or rising sun kick by 5%, and that does stack up to 5 times. So you get 25% increase basically on your spinning crane kick. This really only works well in like AoE situations. In a dungeon when you do a big pull, you got a lot of melee. You're taking a lot of melees, you're dodging quite a bit. Kind of leads to increased like AoE damage, but doesn't help much in single target at all, and really doesn't add much defensive value. The 2-piece extra damage on the blackout kick, and you have a 10% chance to not reset your elusive brawler stacks when you do dodge. It's just not much. You were getting, with your 2-piece and your 4-piece, you're getting a nice 4% damage reduction, just from your 2-piece in season 1. So you are sort of losing something going into season 2, at least from what your tier is going to be giving you. That being said, Monk's been kind of one of those specs that's got boosted a little bit, like slowly buffed, kind of like Warrior was slowly nerfed throughout season 1. You saw 10.0.5 buffs coming in, and really it's just been a solid tank since. It's extremely good AoE damage still, pretty good single target damage. It's one of the higher damage tanks, of course. Its defensive had been bolstered enough to where it can handle any situations, and really is I think one of sort of an underrated tank at this point. It doesn't see a lot of representation. It is one of the more difficult tanks to play, and I think it just gets a bad rap because it is a little more difficult to play, and it kind of understand like the damage patterns of when you're taking damage, when you need to purify, and what defenses to use, because you have so many options for what you're using, using the right button in the right time. It takes a little bit more mastery, almost like on a Blood Death Knight when we talk about difficulty of play and sort of I guess living on the edge of using the right button in the right moment, or you're going to fall over. And Monk is like that, but extremely strong tank. Does have a lot of similar utility to Paladin with the Dispel, which is nice. Ring of Peace, again, great for mob control and like Sanguine Weeks, things like that. Pretty decent on the stops with an AoE stop and a single target stop. So again, brings a little bit of that utility. Does bring Mystic Touch, which is nice if we're in a more physical meta, which I don't know that we will be, but I think a strong tank and a well-rounded tank going into the season.
Dropping down kind of to that next tier of tank, first one we're going to talk about is Guardian Druid. And Guardian Druid was one that I've actually been playing quite a bit of lately, both in Raid and in Mythic Plus. They have a pretty decent tier set. Their tier set is going to help both all their damage from their Mangle, Thrash, Maul, and Raise, which are all their a lot of their big damage spenders that aren't Moonfire, which means that it's probably more effective for the physical damage builds. And then the 4-piece also is going to increase their health by 15%, which does to an extent help with dealing with some of the big magic damage nukes that Bear tends to struggle with. The healing from the tier set is just kind of a slow trickle of healing over time. For a while before they fixed some bugs, it was fantastic. Now it's not bad, but it's nothing to write home about too much. Bear did receive a bit of a nerf with the latest changes to overall health and no changes to healing, and that the other tanks, when their health got changed, their healing got changed as well. With Druid, after the wildfire did not get changed. So that one of the things that Druid was doing really well was they were providing some of that consistent off heal for the party with after the wildfire. That is now going to be significantly weaker than it was in season 1. Druid does have the ability to bring some decent utility to the party. They have a Dispel, although Guardian more so than Resto or Boomkin gets beat up pretty bad trying to take that Dispel. You're still likely going to have to do it some of the weeks in some of the dungeons, but it doesn't feel as good because you're going to end up losing probably your Typhoon in order to do that. Druid, though, is doing really good damage. That's the big thing that it has going for it right now. It's both its AoE and single target damage are pretty good. They do get buffed some with the tier set, so that's kind of the thing that they have going for them. Their inability to take a magic damage hit, particularly well, was kind of bringing them down. We're going to have them landing in B tier. They're a solid tank. They're okay. I came very close to maining on this tier, but ultimately decided that I didn't want to try to do Mythic the last bosses on Mythic with a Druid, so won't be playing it, but I do think that overall they're in a pretty good spot going into the tier.
All right. go ahead and talk about Vengeance Demon Hunter next here. And where did we decide to put this on the tier list? Is it all the way down there in C? So, what's kind of disappointing about putting them down that far? Number one, I mained it in season 1 and actually really enjoyed the spec. But that beside the point, they did see a lot of strange nerfs, buffs to damage. Like, they've seen a lot of touches, and a lot of it was to Havoc and to the class tree. They saw a little bit of rework throughout season 1. And I feel like they've landed in a worse spot now than they were going into Dragonflight. I mean, this was looking like a really strong top tier tank. And it's almost like, I'm not sure why they've kind of continued to nerf it and into the state that it's in right now. Where it's certainly not unplayable and you can do 20s in it and whatnot. I'm a little concerned about going into this season, just its survivability. It actually has one of the more interesting tier sets, which does almost kind of shoehorn you though a little bit into a build, which none of the other tank tier sets really do. I think you said the warrior one does a little bit, but this one actually pushes you down the right side of the tree through fiery demise, burning alive, and down in flames, because basically your tier set is going to apply an additional fiery brand. And that fiery brand can spread. Now, this was actually just hot fixed, or I guess not even hot fixed, but was just changed and nerfed tonight, where instead of being able to kind of store those charges, and there was a way to play around it in which you would essentially use your tier piece or your tier bonus on like the highest remaining fiery brand target in an AoE pack, which would cause it to spread more. And there was like kind of going to be this play style in which really caused you to track it and almost like this second game in it in an AoE situation. Single target situation, you're just hitting the button and it's fine and they're going to be great in single target. But in this AoE situation, you almost had this play style building, which was going to be pretty complicated and something you actually had to play around, something you had to track. They completely took that out now and just said basically, hey, the primary one can spread once, can spread every 2 seconds, and new ones are 10 seconds in duration, but those new ones can't spread. Only the primary ones can spread. So you basically can spread 3 of your fiery brands out now, 1 with the tier set, and then you get 2 charges as long as you are taking down in flames. So basically, I think there's a lot of potential with the tier set and with the play style. I think in raid it's still going to be fine and probably going to be a good single target tank just for that fact that Fiery Brand is so strong. And if you are taunt swapping with another tank and only tanking half the time, you have crazy uptime on Fiery Brand with the tier set too. So it's a pretty good damage tier set. It's a pretty good defensive tier set. It's just the numbers, I think, for Vengeance just aren't quite there. The survivability isn't quite there. And it doesn't quite bring as much utility as some of these other tanks do. Doesn't have the off-healing, doesn't have the dispels. It has Silent Sigil, which is really nice. But, I mean, other tanks have similar things to that to sort of bring that AoE stop. To kind of help counter, with a... that throws out all the shields. Divine Toll. How am I blanking on that one? It's late.
Yeah, and we've talked in the past about Vengeance Demon Hunter being a drain tank and that they're either tuned well or they aren't. And unfortunately right now they aren't. And that's why they kind of end up as our C tier tank. So the last tank we then have to talk about is what I'm going to end up main of this tier, and that's going to be Blood DK. Blood DK's got a okay tier set. Gives some extra damage to Heart Strike and Blood Boil. And then just some extra strength during Vampiric Blood. A lot of the set evolves around giving you additional Vampiric Blood uptime, which, while it's not necessarily the strongest defensive cooldown to have, it is nice HP, and it is nice to have the additional healing. So it feels good. In some of these dungeons, we're having upwards of 50% Vampiric Blood uptime, which is pretty wild. Definitely makes Death Striking to live a lot easier. There's a lot of dungeons this season that are very good to have quite a few grips in. So Brackenhide Hollow, Neltharian's Lair, Uldaman, Underrot all have areas where it's really nice to have a little bit of extra mob control, particularly in the form of grips. That form of mob control, I think, is going to be really strong this tier. What I don't think is going to be, what is also going to be strong though is that ability to bring the dispels, like the poison and disease dispels, or even the curse dispels that druids can bring, are all going to have significant value in several of these keys, and blood's not going to bring anything like that. Blood kind of ends up about where it is right now. It's a very sturdy tank. If it's played well, you can continue to survive on your own merits without really needing a healer. And the fact that health got increased significantly doesn't really affect Death Strike, so Blood Decay is completely fine with that. But their damage is pretty abysmal. They're probably a good 20 to 25% behind the other tanks in single target. Not quite as far behind in AoE, but it's still not particularly good. If Blood was tuned to have the damage of Druid, for instance, it'd probably be pushing for an S tier tank. But as it is, where it is, we think they're going to end up rounding out our B tier. And be serviceable, but probably not the best option for most people.
All right, everyone, that's it for our Season 2 tier list. Let us know what you guys think is going to be good in the comments below, all the YouTube stuff. Do all that, like and subscribe. We appreciate it. We haven't quite had the quantity of content. Hopefully we can have some quality content going into Season 2, so we look forward to that. We'll see you all in the next one. Bye.